Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our aim is always simple, give you that comprehensive understanding you need, quickly, drawn straight from the deepest source material available. Today we're looking beyond, the icon, beyond that often sentimentalized image of the girl in the attic. We're diving into the really complex life and the incredibly enduring work of Anne Frank.
Yeah, it's important because before Anne Frank became this global symbol of lost innocence, she was actually an ambitious, aspiring writer. And her private thoughts, which she captured in, what started as a simple diary, they transformed into one of the most critical and certainly most widely read historical documents of the whole 20th century.
Absolutely.
Uh,
So our mission here in this deep dive is to really unpack the extensive material that surrounds her life, and we'll do it chronologically. We're going to trace her path from her comfortable start in Germany through those 2 harrowing years in hiding, the truly tragic and brutal circumstances of her final months and her death, and then finally that extraordinary, sometimes controversial journey of her writing and her legacy after the war ended.
Right. And the sources we're drawing on, they provide an intense, very detailed, and often, frankly, painful account. It's not just about the history of the Holocaust generally, but crucial specifics about her life. Things like the loss of her citizenship, the desperate failure of their attempts to escape, the relentless scrutiny the diary later faced about its authenticity, and of course, that persistent, really agonizing mystery about who betrayed her family.
Yeah, that mystery looms large. So to set the stage properly, we really have to begin in Frankfurt, Germany. The Frank family's story is, at its heart, a story of displacement. They were forced to flee to the Netherlands in 1934 after Hitler and the Nazi Party rose to power. It was a move that, tragically, only delayed the inevitable disaster.
Exactly. Anne, born Anneliese Marie Frank, arrived in Frankfurt on June 12, 1929. Her family was part of that assimilated sort of middle-class German Jewish community. They identified with Reform Judaism, which means they were quite integrated into secular German life. They didn't strictly observe all the traditional religious laws and customs.
hmm And her parents, Otto and Edith Frank, they were highly educated people. They put enormous value on scholarly pursuits, on reading. They actively encouraged both Anne and her oldest sister Margot to develop intellectually. You can almost picture their early stability, can't you? They first lived in Frankfurt-Eckenheim at Marbachweg 307 before moving in 31 to a more fashionable area, the Poets' Quarter, settling at Ganghoferstrasse 24. It sounds like a pretty normal, settled life, which was then just violently disrupted by the political climate changing so drastically.
Absolutely. When Hitler and the Nazi Party took control in 1933, the atmosphere just changed almost instantly. Edith and the children initially went to Aachen to stay with Anne's maternal grandmother. Meanwhile, Otto Frank went ahead to Amsterdam. He needed to establish a new foundation for the family there. That's when he founded Apecta Works.
Oh, Pecta, right. What exactly did they do?
They produced and sold pectin, which is a gelling agent used for making jam. It was a solid business footing, or so it seemed.
Okay, so the family's move over the next year, it wasn't an isolated event. It was part of this terrifying, much larger movement of people fleeing persecution. The Franks joined, something like 300,000 Jews who fled Germany between 1933 and 1939. They settled in the Rivierenbuurt neighborhood in Amsterdam, which became a hub for many German Jewish refugees, giving them maybe a temporary sense of community, of safety.
It did provide some comfort, yeah. And despite the upheaval, the girls started school pretty quickly. Margot went to public school and apparently did very well, even though she initially struggled with Dutch. And starting in 1934, when she was just 4, went to the 6th Montessori school. She really thrived there, apparently, and made some important early friends, like Hannelie Goslar, who we hear about later.
And it's quite something that that very school was renamed the Anne Frank School in 1957 after her death. A powerful piece of her legacy right there.
It really is. Meanwhile, Otto Frank was working hard to rebuild their life. He even expanded his business, founding a second company, Pectacon, in 1938. This one was a wholesale business, specializing in spices and pickling salts. And this detail, it turns out to be critical.
Ah, so?
Because it was at Pepticon that they hired Hermann van Pels. He was another German Jewish refugee, and he, along with his wife and son, would later share the confinement and the terror of the secret annex with the Franks.
Ah, right. The connection forms early. But that relative sanctuary they found in Amsterdam, it was fatally compromised in May 1940. Germany invaded the Netherlands. That invasion, it tragically sealed their fate, didn't it? It solidified their entrapment. And the political danger soon became a legal nightmare, too.
Absolutely. In 1941, the German right actually stripped Anne of her German citizenship. It sounds like a bureaucratic detail, but it was devastating. It rendered her officially stateless right up until her death. Stateless. That word just hammers home the depth of their desperation, their helplessness. She never formally became a Dutch citizen, did she? Even though the Netherlands was where she spent most of her short life.
No, she didn't. And we know Otto Frank was desperately trying everything. He was using family connections, trying to secure a safe passage for them, specifically to the United States.
The U.S. was their last real hope, wasn't it?
Pretty much, yeah. But the same bombing campaign that crushed the Netherlands also crushed those hopes. The U.S. consulate in Rotterdam was destroyed by German bombing on May 14, 1940. And this was catastrophic because it meant all the family's visa paperwork, which they'd painstakingly gathered, it was all lost in the rubble. The application process just couldn't proceed.
So the door just slammed shut. The months that followed saw this systematic imposition of severe discriminatory laws against the Jewish population. This eventually meant Jewish children were forced out of general schools and into Jewish-only schools. So Anne, along with Margot, started attending the Jewish Lyceum in 1941. And we have one last, almost ghostly glimpse of their life before hiding. On July 20th, 1941, Anne, who was 13 then, was captured in the only known video footage of her. It's silent, only about 20 seconds long. Filmed from her balcony apartment on Merwede Plain, it just shows her leaning out, watching a neighbor's wedding party down below.
Wow. It's such a haunting final image of freedom, isn't it? Taken just about a year before their world completely closed in on them. That pretense of normal life, it was completely shattered in the summer of 1942. The systematic forced deportations of Jews from the Netherlands had begun. The Franks had actually made a plan to go into hiding on July 16th, but that plan had to be accelerated by 10 frantic days.
Right. That was because Margot received a call-up notice. It came from the Central Office for Jewish Immigration on July 5th, ordering her to report for relocation to a supposed work camp.
Which they knew was a lie.
They knew exactly what it meant. So the acceleration was terrifying. On the morning of Monday, July 6, 1942, the family began the walk several kilometers to their hiding place. They couldn't use public transport, of course. Jews were forbidden. Margot actually cycled ahead with Miep Giz, one of Otto's non-Jewish employees, to start getting things ready.
And they carried out this deliberate, calculated deception to buy themselves time, right? They left their apartment looking like they'd fled in a hurry, left it in disarray, planted a note suggesting they'd gone to Switzerland, all designed to make authorities and neighbors think they'd actually escaped the country.
Exactly. And you really see the emotional shift in the small human details that the sources capture. Like before leaving, Anne was apparently deeply worried about her childhood treasures. She gave her neighbor, a girl named Tussaye Coopers, a book, a tea set, and most famously, her tin of marbles.
The marbles, yeah.
She asked her to keep them safe, saying she worried they might fall into the wrong hands if the Nazis found them. That specific concern over a tin of marbles, it just crystallizes the scale of the persecution faced by a 13-year-old girl.
That is such a powerful point. The personal loss right alongside the massive historical trauma.
So the hiding place itself, the Achterhuis, or secret annex, it was a 3-story space, tucked away behind the Opekta offices on Prinsengracht.
That's right. And the access was cleverly hidden behind a movable bookcase that was actually installed after they moved in to make the space truly invisible from the offices and warehouse below.
So life in the annex, it quickly became this exercise in, well, physical and psychological endurance. How many people ended up there?
In total, 8 people lived there. The 4 Franks, the 3 Van Pel's family members, Herman, Auguste, and their son Peter, and then later Fritz Pfeffer, a dentist, joined them.
8 people. And they had to live in profound silence during the day, didn't they? Terrified to the slightest sound, a cough, something dropped, even flushing the toilet might alert the warehouse workers downstairs. Absolutely terrifying. And keeping 8 people alive in total secrecy, that required immense, just selfless courage from their helpers.
Right, the 6 helpers. We should name them. Victor Kugler, Johannes Kleiman, Miep Gies, Beb Voskel, Jan Gies, and Johannes Hendrik Voskel. These people risked everything.
Everything. The sources really stressed this. Sheltering Jews was punishable by the death penalty. They were responsible for food, For risky ration cards, for news, books, trying to maintain morale, they were the only link, the fragile connection to the outside world.
And Anne's diary, it gives us this incredibly uncensored look at the friction that must have been inevitable under that kind of pressure.
Oh, completely. She initially seemed to enjoy the novelty of having other people around, but she soon found Fritz Pfeffer, the dentist, insufferable. She felt he was self-important and always intruding on her space. And she clashed sharply with Auguste Van Pels, too, whom she just found foolish.
She was pretty ruthless in her descriptions, wasn't she? Calling
Right.
both Pfeffer and Herman Van Pels selfish, especially about food, which must have been a constant source of anxiety.
Oh. It really was. Yet we also see her growing up through her relationship with Peter Van Pels, the Van Pels' son. He was shy, 16 years old. It even led to her first kiss.
Right. But even then, the writer in her was already analyzing things, wasn't she?
Yeah, remarkably so. She noted in her diary that she questioned how real their romance was. She debated whether their closeness was genuine emotion or just, a psychological crutch because of the unbearable situation they shared.
That introspection is amazing for her age. And her inner world, captured in the diary, it just shows this monumental personal growth.
The diary itself started as a gift, right?
Yeah, a simple red and white checkered autograph book she got for her 13th birthday just before they went into hiding. She named it Kitty.
Kitty. And the sources show this really profound change in her relationship with her sister, Margot. They do. Initially, they seem quite distant, maybe typical sisters. But Margot's intelligence and her quiet strength really started to impress Anne. Anne wrote in January 1944 that Margot had become much nicer and was acting like a real friend. She felt they'd moved past the stage where Margot treated her like, quote, a little baby who doesn't count.
That's quite a shift. And maybe the most poignant shift is how she reevaluated her relationship with her mother, Edith. They had a really difficult time.
Extremely difficult. Anne initially wrote with real contempt about her mother, calling her careless and sarcastic. But later, when she was revising her diary entries, she felt deeply ashamed of those harsh words.
Did she say why?
Yes, she wrote this incredibly self-aware entry, asking herself, Anne, is it really you who mentioned hate? Oh, Anne, how could you? She realized their conflict came from misunderstandings, and that she'd added unnecessarily to her mother's suffering. She found a new level of tolerance and respect for her.
Wow, that's incredible growth under any circumstances, let alone those.
And what really leaks out from the diary is Anne's fierce ambition. This wasn't just a girl writing down her feelings privately. She dreamed of being a famous journalist or writer. On April 5, 1944, she put it so clearly, writing about her gratitude for the gift of writing. I want to go on living even after my death, and that's why I'm so grateful to God for having given me this gift, which I can use to develop myself and to express all that's inside me.
I want to go on living even after my death. That's extraordinary. And that ambition actually fueled a major project right there in the annex, didn't it?
It did. In 1944, she heard a radio broadcast. It was Gerrit Bolkestein, a member of the Dutch government in exile, speaking from London. He called for people to save their diaries, letters, any documents to create a public record of the German occupation and oppression after the war.
And that lit a fire under her.
Immediately. It gave her a clear purpose. She started revising her original journal, historians call that version A, into a manuscript ready for publication, which we now call version B. She worked meticulously. She used pseudonyms for the others. The Van Pels family became the Van Danes. Fritz Pfeffer became Albert Dussel, although wisely she kept the real names for her own family.
And she addressed all her entries to Kitty.
Yes, maintaining that intimate, fictional confidant throughout the revision. Her dedication was total. Her very last entry was dated August 1st, 1944, just 3 days before the raid.
3 days. So 2 years and 1 month of that absolute terrifying secrecy just ended abruptly. On the morning of August 4th, 1944, the secret annex was raided. It was a group of uniformed German police, the Grünpolizei, led by an Austrian SS officer, Karl Silberbauer, from the Sicherheitsdienst.
That's right. After the arrest, the 8 occupants were taken initially to RSHA headquarters for interrogation. Then they were transferred to the House of Detention in Amsterdam. And finally, 2 days later, transported to the Westerbork transit camp. And crucially, because they were caught in hiding, which the Nazis considered a criminal offense, they were classified as criminals.
What did that mean, practically?
It meant they were sent to the punishment barracks for hard labor. This classification significantly worsened their chances of survival compared to other prisoners.
And the helpers, what happened to them immediately?
The cost was immediate and severe for some. Victor Kugler and Johannes Kleiman were arrested and jailed. Kugler was actually held until almost the end of the war, escaping a death march just weeks before liberation.
But Miep Gies and Bep Foskill, the female helpers, they actually went back to the annex.
They did, shortly after the police left, and this is just a moment of incredible courage and foresight. They found Anne's notebooks and loose diary pages scattered all over the floor. Apparently, Silberbauer had seized Otto's briefcase, which held the diary, and contemptuously emptied it out. Miep and Bep gathered all the papers they could find.
Vowing to keep them safe.
Exactly. Resolved to keep them safe and return them to Anne when she came back, as they hoped she would. Miep even tried, though unsuccessfully, to bribe Silberbauer a few days later, on August 7th, to try and get the prisoners released.
Incredible bravery.
Okay.
Okay, let's turn to that core, agonizing question that still dominates so much of the discussion. Who betrayed the family? Our sources are very clear that the source of the discovery remains an unsolved mystery. Despite decades of investigation, both scholarly and amateur, it's really crucial we look at the main theories that experts debate.
It is. Historically, one of the earliest theories focused on Nellie Voskuil. She was the younger sister of Bep Voskuil, one of the helpers. Nellie was known to be a Nazi sympathizer, even a collaborator, who'd apparently run off with a Nazi officer at one point.
And why her specifically?
Well, there was an alleged incident during a family argument where she supposedly shouted at her family, "Go to your Jews!" And years later, Karl Silberbauer, the arresting officer, was reportedly quoted saying the informer had the voice of a young woman. But it's circumstantial.
Right. Another quite different theory suggests the raid wasn't even aimed at finding hidden Jews initially. It might have been focused on illegal activities of the company itself.
Exactly. A 2016 research report from the Anne Frank House explored this. They looked into investigations around ration card fraud or maybe other illicit business activities happening at Opekta. The theory goes that authorities, while searching the building or questioning employees about the business, might have just stumbled upon the secret entrance by chance.
Plausible, but unproven. Then there's Ans van Dyck.
Ans van Dyck, yes, a really tragic figure, a Dutch Jewish woman who, after being caught herself, became a collaborator and betrayed at least 145 other Jews to the Gestapo. She was executed after the war for collaboration.
And the connection to the Franks.
A Dutch resistance fighter claimed to have seen Van Dyck near the security office building around August 1944, possibly overhearing her discussing the Prinsengracht address. But again, while she certainly betrayed many people, historians say the direct evidence linking her specifically to the Franks is, well, it's thin.
Okay, and that brings us to the most recent and probably most controversial theory. This came out in January 2022 from a cold case investigation team led by a former FBI agent. They pointed the finger at Arnold Vandenberg, a member of the Jewish Council who died back in 1950.
That's the one. The theory speculated that Vandenberg, who was known to have used his connections to protect his own family, might have been forced or chose to give up the location of the Franks. They claimed maybe he did it to save his own family. The team even suggested that Otto Frank might have learned about this alleged betrayal after the war and kept quiet about it.
Right, but this is where we absolutely need to apply significant critical scrutiny, because the backlash from established Holocaust scholars was immediate and pretty definitive.
It really was. They called the evidence presented far too thin. They heavily criticized the investigation team for what they saw as a lack of fundamental historical knowledge, especially about how the Jewish Council actually operated and what its limitations were.
What were the main points of challenge regarding the evidence or sources used?
Two main things stood out. First, scholars argue there's no reliable evidence that the Jewish Council even had a centralized official list of hiding places from which Vandenberg could have simply picked names. That was a key assumption of the theory. Second, and this is critical, the investigation relied very heavily on claims about Vandenberg that were traced back to a man named Anton Schippers.
And who was he?
Schippers was a known Nazi collaborator who had actually been diagnosed as legally insane twice and was notorious for providing unreliable testimony in post-war trials. Using him as a credible source was a major red flag for historians.
Yeah, that detail about the source's reliability is absolutely key. The Dutch publisher of the book, outlining this theory, eventually had to recall it because the critique was so intense. They specifically cited reports of source distortion and the reliance on unreliable testimony like Schippers.
Yeah.
So ultimately, this intense, ongoing, critical study of all these theories, even the discredited ones, it just underscores the profound impact this single unsolved act of betrayal continues to have.
Right. So following their arrests and time in Westerbork, The entire secret annex group was put on the very last transport train to leave Westerbork for Auschwitz. That was September 3rd, 1944. It was a horrific 3-day journey in cattle cars. Upon arrival at Auschwitz-Birkenau, the infamous selection took place immediately on the platform. Men were separated from women and children. That was the last time Otto Frank ever saw his daughters or his wife.
And then the devastating selection process itself. Out of the 1,019 people on that particular transport, how many were sent directly to the gas chambers?
549 were murdered immediately. That included all children younger than 15. Anne, having turned 15 just 3 months earlier, was one of the youngest on that transport to be spared for forced labor.
So close. And she never knew that the others from the annex, including her father, had also survived that initial selection.
No. Tragically, she assumed her father, who was in his mid-50s, must have been killed immediately given his age. This belief stayed with her.
And conditions in Auschwitz. Just nightmarish, presumably.
Absolutely. Anne was forced into grueling labor, things like hauling heavy rocks, digging sod. She was tattooed with an identification number. Witnesses who survived later gave slightly different but complementary views of her time there. Some remembered her becoming withdrawn, very tearful, especially after witnessing the horrors of the crematorium nearby. But others noted she also showed remarkable strength and resourcefulness.
Oh, so?
Using her naturally gregarious personality, apparently, to try and secure extra bits of bread rations, not just for herself, but for Margot and her mother as well.
But disease was everywhere.
Rampant. Both Anne and Margot contracted scabies, this horrific skin infestation. It forced them into the infirmary block, which was described as dark, infested with rats and mice. A truly terrible place.
And it was during this time, wasn't it, that we see this ultimate act of sacrifice from her mother, Edith?
Yes. Edith Frank, already weakened by starvation and disease herself, essentially gave up almost all of her own tiny food rations. She would pass them through a small hole she apparently made in the infirmary wall, desperately trying to keep her daughters alive.
But Edith herself didn't survive Auschwitz.
No, she died later, from disease, starvation, and utter exhaustion on January 6, 1945. By then, her daughters had been moved, possibly unaware of just how close to death their mother was. In late October 1944, Anne and Margot, along with August Manpels, were transferred out of Auschwitz. They were sent to the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in Germany.
Bergen-Belsen. By that stage of the war, it was dangerously overcrowded, wasn't it? Especially with prisoners being evacuated from camps in the east as the Allies advanced.
Exactly. That overcrowding led to a catastrophic breakdown in sanitation and supplies. Disease spread like wildfire, and the death toll spiked dramatically. It was just chaos and death.
And it was here, in Bergen-Belsen, that Anne had these heartbreaking reunions with two friends from her past life in Amsterdam, Hannelie Goslar and Annette Blitz.
Yes. Both survived the war and later recounted these meetings. Nanette Blitz describes seeing Anne through a barbed wire fence. She said Anne was skeletal, bald from having her head shaved, wrapped in only a coarse blanket, and shivering violently. Blitz said the shock of seeing her friend, who she remembered as lively and energetic in that state, was just indescribable.
What did Anne say to them?
She confessed to both friends separately that she believed both her parents were dead. She told Hannelie Goslar she had nothing left to live for, yet even in that utter despair, something of her spirit remained. She apparently still expressed a fierce, maybe flickering hope to Nanette Blitz that she might survive, just so she could write a book based on her diary after the war.
Unbelievable resilience, even then. But the end came in those terrible early months of 1945. Bergen-Belsen was overwhelmed by a typhus epidemic.
Yes, a deadly epidemic which killed an estimated 17,000 prisoners in just a few months. Witnesses who survived later testified that Margot, already critically weak, fell from her wooden bunk in their barracks and died, likely from shock and weakness on top of the typhus, and Anne died just a day or so later.
The precise date of their deaths, that's been subject to quite a bit of research and revision, hasn't it?
It has. The traditional date, which was set by Dutch authorities shortly after the war based on the limited information they had, was March 31st, 1945. That put their deaths just weeks before the British liberated Bergen-Belsen on April 15th.
But newer research suggests it might have been earlier.
Yes, much more detailed research published in 2015 by the Anne Frank House suggested they may have died significantly earlier, possibly as early as February or maybe early March 1945. This revised timing was based on cross-referencing multiple survivor testimonies, records of when typhus symptoms were first observed around February 7th for the sisters, and known medical timelines for untreated typhus, which usually resulted in death within about 12 days.
So that earlier date, it just underscores how agonizingly close they were to potential liberation.
Yeah.
Such a fine margin.
It really does. And the only person from the secret annex to survive the Holocaust was Otto Frank.
Otto, he survived Auschwitz.
He did. He was liberated from Auschwitz by Soviet troops in January 1945. He eventually made his way back to Amsterdam, arriving in June 1945. He was taken in and sheltered by Miep and Jan Gies while he desperately tried to find out what happened to his family.
He learned about Edith's death while traveling back, didn't he?
Yes, but he still held out hope for the girls. It took weeks of agonizing searching and waiting before he finally received the devastating confirmation that both Margot and Anne had perished in Bergen-Belsen.
And it was only then, at that moment of confirmation, that Miep Gies felt she could give him the diary.
Exactly. Miep had kept her promise. She had preserved the diary notebooks and all the loose notes she'd found. She presented them to Otto. Otto Frank later described reading his daughter's words as an incredibly painful process. He admitted he'd had, quote, no idea of the depth of her thoughts and feelings. He saw for the first time the private turmoil, the ambitions, the critiques she had hidden, even from him. He realized she had kept all these feelings to herself.
So, driven by that discovery and by Anne's own clearly stated wish to be an author, Otto Frank became determined to get her work published. He meticulously took her original raw journal entries, version A, and combined them with her own edited, more polished manuscript, version B. He kept the pseudonyms she'd chosen for everyone else, but used the real names for his own immediate family.
That's right. The first publication was in Dutch, Het Achterhoofd, the Annex, which came out in 1947. It was an immediate success in the Netherlands, actually requiring 5 more printings by 1950. It spread quickly through Europe after that, appearing in Germany and France in 1950. And then it debuted in the U.S. in 1952 under the title Anne Frank, The Diary of a Young Girl.
And it's interesting, the sources note its early, maybe surprising, success in Japan. While the British edition apparently struggled initially to find a big audience, the diary sold over 100,000 copies very quickly in Japan.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Apparently, Anne was identified there as this powerful cultural figure, a symbol of youth and potential senselessly destroyed by war. It resonated deeply in post-war Japan.
And the diary's global fame was then absolutely cemented by the adaptations, wasn't it? The play and the film.
Oh, definitely. A 1955 play based on the diary was hugely successful, won a Pulitzer Prize for drama, and then the popular 1959 film followed that. Her biographer, Melissa Mueller, she noted that these adaptations were really crucial in, quote, romanticizing, sentimentalizing, and universalizing Anne's story. They helped turn the specific, horrific tragedy into a more universal, accessible narrative for a mass audience.
And today, it's just one of the world's best-known books, isn't it? Translated into over 70 languages.
Easily. And literary critics recognized its value beyond just being a historical document. They praised the writing itself. John Berryman noted its stunning honesty. Others, like the dramatist Meyer Levin, commended her innate ability to, quote, sustain the tension of a well-constructed novel. It was seen as a genuine literary achievement by a teenager.
And that praise went far beyond literary circles. World leaders started weighing in, giving it immense cultural weight.
Absolutely. Eleanor Roosevelt called it one of the wisest and most moving commentaries on war and its impact she had ever read. John F. Kennedy famously said that of all the multitudes who throughout history have spoken for human dignity in times of great suffering, no voice is more compelling than that of Anne Frank.
And later, Nelson Mandela specifically mentioned reading Anne's diary while he was imprisoned on Robben Island. He drew parallels between her struggle against Nazism and his own fight against apartheid in South Africa.
Powerful connections across time and struggles. However, the diary's immense status as both history and symbol inevitably attracted intense scrutiny and, tragically, outright denial. From the late 1950s onwards, allegations that the diary was a forgery started to circulate. These were often pushed by neo-Nazi groups and Holocaust deniers, beginning mainly in places like Sweden and Norway.
And this political challenge led directly to Simon Wiesenthal getting involved, the famous Nazi hunter.
Right. In 1958, Wiesenthal was confronted by protesters at an event who were claiming Anne Frank was fictional, that she never existed. He made it his mission to prove her existence definitively by finding the man who arrested her. And he succeeded. He located Karl Silberbauer, the SS officer, in Vienna in 1963. Silberbauer readily admitted his role in the arrest. He identified Anne from a photograph, and crucially, he corroborated the helper's story about the diary by recalling emptying Otto's briefcase full of papers onto the floor during the raid.
That confirmation from the arresting officer himself should have really ended the debate, but somehow it didn't. Deniers persisted.
They did, which forced repeated and costly legal battles over the years. Otto Frank and later the Anne Frank House Foundation after his death had to fight multiple lawsuits against Holocaust deniers who kept publishing these false claims. Courts eventually imposed fines and banned the denial publications.
And this pressure also led to the most definitive forensic proof, didn't it?
Yes. After Otto Frank passed away in 1980, he willed the original diary manuscripts to the Dutch Institute for War Documentation. They, in turn, commissioned an exhaustive forensic study by the Netherlands Ministry of Justice, which was completed in 1986. This was the ultimate scientific confirmation. The study analyzed the handwriting, matching it to known examples of Anne's writing. It verified the paper, the glue used in the binding, the ink, all were confirmed as authentic materials from the period when the diary was written.
And these findings were published in what's known as the critical edition of the diary.
Exactly. A massive volume detailing all the research. And following that, the Hamburg Regional Court in Germany legally confirmed the diary's authenticity again in 1990, trying to put the matter to rest legally.
So these legal battles and the whole authentication process, they ultimately led to a more complete picture of Anne herself emerging, didn't they? The gradual reveal of the uncensored Anne.
That's a good way to put it. Over time, sections that Otto Frank had initially removed, likely trying to protect his daughter's privacy or perhaps shield the family from further pain or scrutiny, these were gradually restored and included in new editions of the diary. It provided a much more rounded and, frankly, more human portrait of Anne.
What kind of passages are we talking about?
Mostly passages dealing with her natural teenage development and curiosity. Things relating to her burgeoning sexuality, her exploration of her own body, her thoughts on menstruation, and also, significantly, some of her more pointedly critical remarks about her parents' sometimes strained marriage, and particularly her difficult relationship with her mother, which we discussed earlier.
Right. And then there was that very recent discovery in 2018. 2 pages she had physically pasted over with brown paper were deciphered using new imaging technology.
Yes, that was fascinating. Those hidden pages contained an attempt by Anne to explain sex education to herself, showing her intellectual curiosity and growing maturity. And alongside that, a handful of dirty jokes she'd apparently copied down.
So it just showed a normal teenager grappling with puberty, with curiosity, with humor, even while trapped in this absolutely terrifying, life-threatening situation. Adds another layer of complexity to her. Has.
Absolutely. And Anne Frank's legacy today, it's so profoundly woven into the physical landscape, especially in Amsterdam, but also globally. The Anne Frank house itself, opened back in 1960 on Prinsengracht, remained intentionally unfurnished.
Why is that?
The idea was, and is, that the stark emptiness allows visitors to really experience the sense of confinement, the atmosphere of the space where they hid, rather than viewing it like a traditional museum filled with objects. It focuses on the space and the story.
That makes sense. And her father, Otto, he worked tirelessly to ensure her message lived on, didn't he? He established the Anne Frank Funds.
Yes, in Basel, Switzerland in 1963. It's a charitable foundation that administers the diary's copyright worldwide, and its entire mission is dedicated to supporting educational initiatives, particularly those fighting racism and prejudice globally. All the proceeds go to charity.
And there's also her earlier home, the apartment on Merwede Plain, where she lived before hiding. That's been preserved, too.
It has. It was meticulously restored to its 1930s appearance, and now it serves a really beautiful purpose. It's used as a writer-in-residence for authors who are unable to write freely or safely in their own home countries, a powerful echo of Anne's own silenced ambition.
That's wonderful. And of course, there's the story of the Anne Frank tree, the big horse chestnut tree she could see from the annex window that she wrote about.
Yes, the tree. It became a symbol in itself. There was a legal battle initially to save it from being cut down due to disease. It survived that, but sadly, it eventually blew down in a heavy gale in 2010.
But its legacy lives on too, right?
It does. Saplings cultivated from that original tree before it fell have been distributed all over the world. They've been planted in significant places like Liberty Park, which is part of the 9/11 Memorial Site in New York, and at the Children's Museum of Indianapolis, among many others. It creates this physical, living link between her story and modern historical memory.
And that global reach is just confirmed by how many schools are named after her.
It's quite staggering. As of a few years ago, there were over 270 schools worldwide named after Anne Frank, over 100 in Germany alone, nearly 90 in France. Her story continues to be a core part of history education, certainly in the Netherlands and many other places.
So if we try to synthesize everything we've covered in this deep dive, we're left with this profound, almost unbearable contrast, aren't we? On one hand, you have the crushing historical reality, the persecution, the failed escapes, the statelessness, the criminal deportation, the horrific deaths. And set against that, you have the powerful, enduring literary achievement of a 15-year-old girl who desperately wanted her voice to be heard, who wished to live beyond her death.
She absolutely achieved that ambition, didn't she, to go on living even after her death. But it raises a really interesting final thought considering the immense perpetual critical study her life and diary receive. The endless debates about authenticity, the forensic analyses, the constant search for definitive answers about her betrayal, sometimes even when it seems based on shaky sources or leads nowhere concrete. It makes you wonder about the impact of all that scrutiny.
Right. So a final thought perhaps for you, the listener, to consider. Does this perpetual critical search for every last historical detail, every definitive answer about her life and death, does it ultimately reinforce the moral power of her story, keeping her voice relevant by keeping the conversation constantly alive? Or, conversely, does that intense focus on historical debate, on authenticity challenges, on solving the mystery of the betrayal, does it risk distracting from the core moral and humanitarian message that Anne's diary originally conveyed with such power, potentially reducing her profound legacy in some ways to an unsolved historical puzzle?